for this day that you've given us. I pray that you help us to continue to grow in our relationship with you and learn more about marriage and family. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. Okay, first thing that I wanted to ask of you guys is, next week we're kind of summarizing the whole course, and I would like if you could email me maybe a question or a topic that you feel like we didn't visit, or a topic that you want to revisit. So if you guys could do that and just send me an email for that, that would be really good, and we can kind of have a summary week and go over things maybe that we didn't really get into that we should have. Okay? All right. Today we're going to do divorce.
No.
All right. And remarriage.
Oh, yay.
All right, so how many of you came from a house where your parents were divorced? So 1, 2. And Zach, your mom never was married, right?
Well,
So
she got married like later in my life, then got divorced,
okay.
and
so
is now single.
So you're in the whole blended
I get everything.
situation.
Yeah.
All right, so you kind of have experience for sure in this area. So probably only 3 people, which that's great. All right, so as far as divorce goes, in your ministry, you're obviously going to be ministering to a lot of people who are divorced. All right, you're going to come across this frequently. And when talking about divorce, it's one thing I had, just in saying this about divorce, is how serious it is when someone comes to talk to you about it. Like when somebody comes to you to ask, do you think I should divorce this person? You better know what the Bible has to say about it. You better know a lot of the details, and do not be quick to speak. Right? Because it's a very serious thing. And you don't really always know both sides of the story. There could be something that's very clear, which maybe you could offer guidance on, but it's a sacred thing to say something. So be very careful when you say it. So take your time in talking through people that are struggling in this area and are at the point where they feel like they want to be divorced. All right, so marriage itself, from what the Bible has told us, is it's that God's idea. It's a covenant that's meant to last forever. And when God created the institution of divorce, He intended it to be something that was permanent. But obviously, sin comes into the world. It corrupts everything, ruins everything, our relationships with one another. So the Bible has allowances for divorce. Matthew 19:8 says, because of the hardness of your heart, so meaning that there's something wrong there, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. So it wasn't the original design. All right, so all divorce is hurtful, because when you have 2 people becoming one flesh, that's ripping apart something, tearing it. So it's kind of like the death, you could say, of a relationship, where people who are going through divorce frequently go through the same stages of grief that you go through when somebody actually dies, only the person is still alive. Right, so it's a very hard thing in that it's a death to a relationship, and it literally causes severe grief in people. All right, we live in a me-now culture, which has led to a deterioration in the permanence of marriage. So there is an expectation that when the marriage no longer meets my needs, I can move on and find somebody else and maybe be serial monogamous and keep going to the next person, marry them, and so forth. As long as the person makes me happy, then I can be in a relationship with them. Alright, so the consequences of divorce are especially painful and long-lasting to everybody involved. So it's not only the couple, it's children, it's extended family, even friends of the couple, in that the relationship is damaged there as well. Matthew 19:6b says, "So they are no longer two, but one flesh, and then what therefore God has joined together, let not man separate." So it's meant to be permanent. So divorce separates and pulls apart this covenant that was meant to go on till death. All right, so as many as 4 in 10 marriages end. Many of these people who end up divorced end up remarrying after. That's what my dad did. My mother never remarried, but my dad did remarry barely after the divorce. He was actually with her long before they were even separated, I think, looking back. All right, Sam's going to share with us some basic marriage statistics. He already told us all this stuff, but just to be reminded.
Okay. There are 86 divorces every hour compared to 230 marriages an hour. The amount of marriages per year is also decreasing. There is an estimate that says 41% of first marriages will end in divorce. This is followed by a failure rate of 60% for second marriages. Then when it comes to third marriages, the chances of divorce are 73%.
Oh, so that's a lot higher, so incrementally
And the
higher.
average lifespan before divorce is 8 years. And the likelihood of getting divorced after the 8-year period goes down. I
Okay,
couldn't find an exact number for that though.
yeah. So if you get past that beginning part,
Mhm.
you're way more likely to not divorce. Okay, anything else?
It says, well then I just talked about millennials are waiting longer to get married, and then the statistics currently say that couples between the age of 18 and 24 are likely to split up, and then millennials are waiting longer to get married, which has dropped the divorce rate a little, but less marriages.
I wonder what your generation, what it's gonna be, a bit down the road, if there's gonna be higher or lower. All right, marital dysfunction myths. All right, so why do couples divorce in the first place? Myth number 1 is affairs are the primary cause of divorce. All right, affairs are a cause of divorce, but 20 to 25% say the primary reason 80% couples seek a divorce is because they perceive a deterioration in intimacy in their relationship. So there's a lack of feeling connected with each other. So that's seen as actually the biggest reason, is we're not really closely connected. Then when frequently people aren't closely connected, then affairs are usually a result of that. So probably the core problem would be deterioration of intimacy, probably through not working out fights, not communicating. Myth 2 is gender differences. So that would be referring to how men and women are so different, how men act a certain way and they communicate differently than women do, and women have certain expectations, so that's what they're really talking about that. All right, gender does complicate things. It does cause arguments that can come up, but it's not the primary cause. We would say it's more about the actual intimacy in the relationship. All right, communication problems cause marital conflicts. Yeah, without a doubt, they do. But conflict, if you do it well, we talked about how you can do conflict well, it can open up communication. All right, so not doing it well is probably how a relationship deteriorates, but having conflict, and if you can get through it, it can be something that's make you closer. All right, myth 4, unsuccessful marriages have little or no give something to get something. All right, so it's about the give and take sort of thing. Marriages end because partners stop loving each other. A lot of people use this as a reason. I no longer love the person. All right, so what do you think of that? When somebody says I'm no longer in love with them, what is that? Do you think that's true? People don't really love the other person?
No.
No? What do you think it is?
No, I think there's, like, a lot of people will mistake the not loving each other for the lack of, like, I guess.
Right.
Like, people will get married because they love each other and they like being around each other and they love talking, they love just being together, and when they hit the point of they actually start realizing that that's another person that
Yeah.
they have to like outside of just loving
Yeah,
them,
then,
then,
put it
like,
in a great way.
you
I
can get,
that.
like, you get bored of them.
Right.
Because if you stop trying to invest in them and you're like, well, I already know everything about you, you're not entertaining anymore.
It's
You have
one
to
thing
be
to
willing.
love somebody, but to like them's even better,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people will mistake that for love. And
Yeah.
they think, well, it's not worth the effort anymore. Yeah.
And how many of you know of divorced couples who actually still love each other? I mean, a lot of them do. I remember when my mother died, my father was brokenhearted over her death. You know, he was just as grieved as I was. And she felt the same way. Even though they couldn't get along with each other, there was always probably a level of love and concern for the other person's well-being. So it's really hard to get rid of that. But liking them can be a hard thing, for sure. All right, social characteristics leading to divorce. So first thing, low income. So these are things that you can have higher rates of divorce if you fall under these categories. Obviously not, it doesn't mean it's gonna happen. Low income, low education. So on the having means financially generally leads to less stress, so that could be a factor there. Low education, generally it could be learning about how to cope in life, how to deal with communication, all of those things. People who are more highly educated generally have better social skills. Young age at marriage, all right, lack of education and premarital pregnancy could be factors in the higher divorce rates. So people getting married before they have a chance to launch out into a career, maybe if a pregnancy is forcing them to get married in the first place. Obviously, I'm pro young marriage. I was married young. A lot of you will likely be married pretty young. So it doesn't necessitate that it's going to be something that's negative, but it's seen as one of the risk factors. All right, certain careers, high demand, stressful jobs. Paige has told us about the law enforcement stressors. That's a stressful job. Did any of your parents have stressful jobs that you would say is a particularly stressful job area? What's yours?
Pastor.
Oh, the pastors. Yeah, all of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of you are definitely saying that. The pastors, families. What other stressful job?
I mean, if it's really busy, like being a chef in a restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
Mom works with bombs.
Wait, what?
She makes bombs.
She makes bombs?
Yeah, she's a part of the ammunition fund, like, process for the government.
Whoa, that's pretty cool. That's really interesting. What sort of education did she need? This is a diversion.
She
here. This
doesn't
is
have
just-
education. She doesn't need education for it.
Okay. So it's
Yeah.
not like she's some
She's
chemical
basically a
engineer
factory
deciding
worker.
how to make the bomb,
She's
or-
a factory worker,
Okay.
but they're highly explosive
I've
and
never
dangerous.
met a bomb maker. That's different. Okay, what did you want to say?
Or you have it, you don't know.
Yeah. I spelled, oh gosh.
My dad's in the military.
Military.
But he was a military chaplain, so a lot of the time he had to pray over the people
Oh,
who
yeah,
are
yeah.
going through surgery and
Right.
were about to die.
Right.
So, or they're dropping out of the plane.
Yeah. All right. Other ones. Interracial marriage could be stressors there. We talked about if the family's not accepting of it, or the culture or community where the people live. Unemployment. previous divorce in the first place. We heard those statistics, it keeps going from 40 to 60s to 70s as you keep going forward. Courtship of less than 6 months, so not really taking the time to get to know the person. All right, factors, social, psychological factors related to divorce. All right, 4 behaviors that are corrosive, that destroy relationships, that destroy marriages. The first thing, criticism. All right, and wives are generally known for being more prone to criticize. All right, to come up with some sort of complaint. What do the men do? Do you have criticisms, but you just don't say them? Is that better self-control in the mind, or what? Maybe just can't.
You just say what to do all the time.
Yeah. So it's the concept of like the nagging wife. Yeah. All right, criticism is presenting a problem as though the other person has a defective personality. So we could say there's positive criticism where you're trying to be constructive and maybe point out that if you turn left, you're gonna, I don't know, hit a pole or something like that. Or it could be something where you're doing backseat driver where, you drive. I do this. Really? Yeah. So you have to do it in such a way that you're not attacking personality. All right, defensiveness, second thing. Defending instead of seeing if criticism has truth to it in the first place. All right, so trying to not be defensive. Desiring to just be right and deny any responsibility to be part of the problem. Or defensiveness leaves little room to see the partner's point of view. So the defensiveness takes the view and puts it on yourself, and you don't put yourself in the other person's shoes. All right, let's get our first presentation. Who's up first? Marlissa wants to go? All right. This is an extended clap here.
Get Mark.
Okay, for this one, I'm just talking like from a podcast review basically. So I listened to this podcast called Parenting Without Power Struggles by Susan Stifelman, or Stifelman, I don't know how you say the last name. Anyway, so Susan's basically this like family therapist and coach and whatnot, so she's really well known in like the parenting world and whatnot. And so from all of her experiences, she wrote 2 books called Parenting Without Power Struggles and Parenting with Presence. She started this podcast and website and wrote her books because she believes that children need to know they can depend on their parents to guide them through the ups and downs of their lives with calm, presence, and connection. So basically, in this podcast, we talked about what it's like to have an ADHD son who's like 17 and he's getting ready to go to college, and how he forgets like all of these things and whatnot. And she's struggling with him trying to apply for colleges, apply for scholarships, get his laundry done, do his homework, because he just forgets everything.
The nagging mom.
Yeah. So basically she came onto the podcast and was asking for help or whatever from Susan. So Susan basically gave her some little information, tidbits of knowledge. When you have a kid with ADHD, it's going to drive you crazy because they forget all the time, a lot of the time, the important stuff. And it's going to drive you crazy, but you got to try and be patient, because if you're patient, then the kid's not going to feel like stressed out for causing you stress and problems like that. So I also went back and looked into more of Susan's books, because the podcast was only like 25 to 40 minutes long, so it wasn't too detailed. So I went and looked at one of her books, and so in the books, she really likes to tell that her parents that being the calm captain of the ship, rather than a dictator or being a two-lawyer relationship with your kid, is way better than anything else. So I wasn't sure what captain and lawyers and dictator really meant. So basically, She explained the captain as like the role you should have, where you're like in charge, but you also give them their own roles and whatnot, so they know what they're supposed to do, but not being domineering, like a dictator. And then, but the lawyers are the people who like get into arguments constantly, and they're fighting each other, and there's no relationship there. It's just arguing and destroying the relationship, actually. So that was that. And then the dictator, basically, is what it is, where the parents are actually under the control of their child, or the parent doesn't let the child do anything on their own. So it can be flipped.
It goes both ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So she told the mom, Kathy, on the podcast about this as well, actually, and just reminded her of it because Kathy was a reader of her books. So then Kathy says that her son is becoming really forgetful again of his appointments. He missed a major doctor's appointment, and she couldn't take him because she's a working mom. She's working 2 jobs. Her husband, I can't remember what he does, but he's also working, so he's long shifts. And so she expressed some distress with his future. And as a future mom, I would understand what she's stressing about, because if your child can't take care of themselves right now in high school to get themselves to something so simple as a guidance counselor appointment, how are they going to get themselves to a doctor's appointment? So I understand where she's coming from and whatnot. So then holy cow. Today's been a rough day, guys, I'm not going to lie. So Susan explained to Kathy that comforting her anxiety all by herself, from that, is actually really bad for her son and her relationship. Instead, she needs to comfort her anxiety by talking with her son, who we named Thomas in this podcast. And so she recommended for her to create a calendar with Tommy and then connect his calendar to his phone with his reminder app and whatnot. And then she said to explain why she's stressed to Tommy, explain why she's scared for him and whatnot. And so this podcast overall was really good to know, just because as a future kids pastor, I don't know what kind of students I'm going to have in my ministry. I could have a kid with ADHD. I could have a kid who's struggling with depression. You never know. And so being able to listen to this podcast and get professional takes on it was kind of informational for me, so I can know how to kind of approach a kid with ADHD and how to, not blow up the situation. So, yeah, that's the podcast.
Thank you.
The podcast was called Coaching with Susan, Parenting a Young Parent with a Young Adult Who Has ADHD. Yeah, it's a long one. Yeah. Good job on time.
English is not English in
All right, next one is contempt. Contempt is the suggestion that you're superior in some way to the other person. So couples who do this end up emotionally separated from one another, and hostility grows. So it's one thing that what you need to do is, when we were talking about that, what was that book we went through? Sacred Marriage. When we went through Sacred Marriage, we talked about this contempt concept. How you don't even put the thought in your mind where you're thinking negatively towards the other person, putting them down, thinking that you're superior, that they don't know what they're doing, that they're this. You have to choose to push that and not let that be a part of your thought pattern. All right, so that you don't grow angry towards one another. 4th thing, stonewalling. So this would be the avoidance thing when we talked about communication. Could be verbal or nonverbal. Refusing to engage or even provide feedback when somebody asks you a question. Not saying anything back. All right, couples are more prone to divorce when negative comments and behavior begin to outweigh the positive ones. So the communication patterns where you need to do things such as the sandwiching concept of putting a positive first before you deliver the blowing negative comments. and maybe some more positive before and after on each side, that really helps to deal with that one. All right, 3 models for the causes of divorce. So this is looking at why do people get divorced, and it looks at 3 different theories of how you look at it sociologically. The first one is in the enduring dynamics model, which says that behaviors are established early in marriage that either lead to stability or instability, and if there's instability, it leads to divorce. All right, remember how I said in the first year of marriage, the patterns that you set up in your communication and what you tolerate, as if you tolerate a lot of bad behavior in those early years, if you really begin accepting that and establishing communication that is poor from the very beginning and you get stuck in it, then it's more likely to end up in divorce. So, theory makes sense. All right, next one's disillusionment. Disillusionment models. So, the marriage partner idealize one another early in the relationship. Everybody does this. You think highly, or hopefully, unless you have some arranged marriage, you're going to think highly of the person you marry. And then when they discover who they really are, this leads to disillusionment. All right, everybody does go through a stage probably of where you get feeling disillusioned, where you're thinking, oh gosh, what did I get myself into with this person? I don't know if everybody feels that on the same level, because sometimes you have a good person, sometimes you don't. But the disillusionment's there, but you don't go down that road.
Can disillusion be a positive thing?
Well, I suppose if it's pointing out maybe things that you have to work on. But you definitely go, you remember how we talked in the beginning of a relationship where there's a lot of excitement?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And then after that excitement phase, everybody experiences a lull in that excitement, just because the dopamine circuits aren't meant to be driven high all your life.
No.
It's meant to be in a state of homeostasis, so it goes up and down and tries to level out. So you're gonna get to a point where it levels out and it feels like disillusionment. But it's not, doesn't necessarily have to go that way. All right, so that's when you get to the point where you have to learn to love one another, make choices to love one another, and if it's not done, then it can lead to divorce. All right, emergent distress model says early marital happiness can be destroyed by negative marital disagreements. All right, so those fights that start in the early years that don't get resolved, resentment builds over time, distrust, a lack of communication because you're afraid to say certain things. So those things, if they're not resolved, it can lead to divorce. All right, top 10 dimensions or issues that are important for happiness in married couples. All right, so this is going to be 5 things, and then we'll look at when some of these things aren't meant, people are more likely to be divorced. So important things, personality issues. All right, so whether good or bad. Communication. So the ability to talk with one another. I thought next week we can go over kind of like couples therapy communication assignments that they give out, where you can learn how to communicate with one another and how you can give to either, you know, in your own relationship or the relationship that you're trying to teach someone about it. You can go through exercises to learn how to communicate better with one another. All right, so personality, communication, conflict resolution, couple flexibility. All right, I guess we looked at this when we talked about family flexibility, whether a family is flexible or not, whether they show grace, you know, when things go wrong, or if it is a situation where they're just dictators and they don't focus on relationship. So a flexible relationship is focused on grace and maintaining a relationship over a following rule. Financial management, we talked about that. I think that's probably one of the top ones. Leisure activities. It's important for happiness. I don't know if I would consider that a top 10 thing, though, that could potentially lead to divorce. Unless maybe you have leisure activities that you never spend any time together, or these leisure activities lead you away from the other person for a very long time. Like on a hunting trip for a month out, I don't know. Out somewhere. Sexual relationship. All right, having problems in that area and not being able to resolve those. Children and parenting. So fighting over parenting, having maybe a difficult child. Family and friends. So extended family, what role they play. And then maybe even religious orientation. All right, so hopefully that wouldn't be an issue for you guys, but it could be for people that you talk to. All right, so these are Olson's 5 types of marriage that are related to those top 10 dimensions that we saw on the other page. All right, so it talks about how there can be these causes of divorce, and they're related to maybe one of those needs in the top 10 dimensions that aren't met. All right, the first one is the devitalized one. So this couple expresses dissatisfaction in all the dimensions.
Oh.
All right, so this is really a negative sort of couple. All right, they're seeing everything as it's not good and has usually considered divorce. So they're really at a point where it is, the relationship is in a really, really bad place, devitalized. A conflicted couple would be one that has dissatisfaction stemming from things within the relationship, and satisfaction stemmed from things outside the relationship. So they might see part of their world as being okay outside of the relationship, but within the relationship, that's where they see all the problems. Traditional. So this could be dissatisfied with communication, conflict resolution, sex, but we're satisfied with family, friends, religion, and leisure time. All right, so the most satisfied group in how they handle parenting. So this would be maybe the more common area where they would say that our problems are basic problems. Communication, conflict resolution, sex, but maybe the things, certain areas in those top 10 dimensions were okay. Fourth type of couple is harmonious. So this type of couple reports having relatively high quality of relationships. So they would score high in a lot of those 10 areas. And then vitalize, the highest level of satisfaction. All right, so shows all different levels. All right, let's get the next, who's our next, you're our next one. All right.
Alright, so I drew a picture. So I wanted to focus on like how parenting and or like the spouses, how they focus on each other doesn't disclude the satisfaction and health of their children, but it can like further it. So you can see that they're paying attention to each other and they're taking care of each other and their relationship. But they're not just letting their kid go. They're still holding up and supporting the kid and making sure that they have things that they need and setting up a great environment for the kid.
So that's good, because when we talked about parent-centered parenting, or the couples, you're supposed to focus on each other, but a lot of parents these days focus more on the child, right? And then the child actually suffers, but what our picture really shows is how the child thrives when the parents are focused on one another. So that's a really good visual for it.
I love it.
Yeah, and so I didn't include like a lot of facial stuff for the parents because I feel like with time and just the pace that things go, we kind of go like out with the old and with the new. And so you have to be careful like be intentional with your relationship, and you can tell that they are because they're still, like, even without that, they're like loving each other.
Do you guys like seeing your parents hug each other?
Yes.
No. No?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly, you know what? Young kids love it.
Yeah.
Like, if you ever see parents that are hugging each other and there's like a toddler, they really, really love that. They feel the security of that, the parents loving one another.
Yeah. So with ministry, I think it's just important to continue to pour into your relationship with your spouse and making sure that you're being intentional with them so that you can have that partner. When you're not focusing on each other and not considering each other as your actual partner, and you're just pouring all of your effort into the kids, then things kind of start to fall apart. So being intentional. I'm done.
All right, that was great. All right, other causes related to divorce, other factors. 2 key premarital factors that increase marital distress. The first one, premarital interaction. All right, so such as emotional invalidation. So maybe not saying that a person's feelings, or when they express themselves, it's not accepted, or it's not okay that you feel a certain way. Poor conflict resolution, obviously, never goes well. All right, therapists find the most difficult areas to treat when trying to get a couple that is on the road towards divorce and they're trying to treat them. They say that a lack of loving, addictions of any kind, and extramarital affairs. So if a couple comes and they're looking to get back together, those things are the hardest things to work with. All right, not impossible, but the lack of loving is probably somebody that's totally disengaged in the whole relationship in the first place. And the problems have been very long-standing. Addictions, always an issue. And extramarital affairs, you guys have probably heard of some couples who can rebound from those things. There's always the need to regain trust and restore that relationship. So when an affair happens, then that covenantal bond in that marriage is basically broken. All right, it's no longer there. So if the two are to come back together, I would see it more as you would need to actually be remarried, like to re-express your covenantal bond with one another before God, because that covenant has been broken by someone else being introduced into the relationship. All right, causes, types of divorce. So this is just something to know, and then as you counsel people, you'll have to look up current information on different types of divorce that are available out there. Because people might come to you for advice as to how to deal with this, how to figure it out. All right, so there's different types of divorce. So fault divorce. So one spouse must have done something wrong. So such as adultery, physical or mental cruelty, desertion, confinement in prison, physical incapacity for the purpose of sexual intercourse, and incurable insanity. All right, so a fault divorce. And each divorce has different legal requirements, different costs involved, different situations. All right, fault divorce is not the most likely one that's used really these days, but in the past, that would have been looked towards as you have to have a really valid reason to be divorced. Nowadays, it's less common to really even need a reason. So that would lead us to this next one, which is no fault divorce, where you would say no one's really at fault for the failure of the marriage. We just no longer love each other, or we both made mistakes, and they don't want to really list off all those mistakes. And they use words such as incompatibilities or irreconcilable differences. Next one's uncontested. So this one can take one of two courses. Either one spouse does not respond to the other spouse's request for a divorce, or that spouse agrees to every detail of the decision. So it's just basically a very simplified way to get divorced. All right, contested one is if an agreement cannot be reached on every issue, then it goes before a judge and it causes the most turmoil. All right, a lot of times you would have to, if you have to deal with custody issues, then it would need to be dealt with at a higher level than if there was no children involved, or if you're actually fighting over custody. All right, simplified divorce. So this is speedy, uncontested, less expensive, can be done out of court. And then there is this concept of the covenant marriage. So in response to rising high divorce rates, this is offered in a few states: Louisiana, Arizona, Arkansas. I always say that I wish I could live in Arkansas. Just because I like it. Couples agree to go to counseling before marriage. So basically they go to counseling before marriage and accept a more limited grounds for divorce. So it's kind of like, what do they call that, premarital agreement sort of thing that you do? A prenuptial. It's similar to that concept, only you're going into it with saying, I agree to not get divorced unless there's a real good reason for it. These couples could potentially have higher stability in their relationship in the first place due to their personal commitments to marriage in the first place, rather than the law being the issue. So people who are interested in pursuing a covenant marriage are going to be way more in it in the first place. But good, it's a good concept. All right, Jenna was going to share with us in her project. She talked about some of the costs of divorce. Divorce costs a lot of money. All right, so she's going to tell us some averages here.
Yeah. So, if just like the couple gets divorced, like no kids or anything, it is $9,729 per person and $19,458 for the couple. And then the average cost of a divorce with children is $13,465 per person and $26,930 per couple.
A lot more.
And then it says, childless divorce decreases the average cost of divorce by approximately 10%. So if you don't have any children, the cost of divorce goes down only about like 10%. And the most expensive U.S. states for divorce are California, New York, and Texas. California is $28,000 per couple. New York is $27,000, and Texas is $25,000.
I wonder why Texas? You can see New York and California without a doubt, but why Texas?
All the X's in the
Oh,
Yeah.
so really expensive. And also think about, you know, I don't know, I know cases of people who get divorced and there's mental illness involved, and you're trying to fight over maybe the custody of a kid. And if you don't get a lawyer that knows what they're doing, you know how that really, and if you're not able to pay for it, that can totally change the course of the outcome of your entire life. A really terrible thing. All right, is that it for the?
Yeah. That's
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you think people who have like serious mental disorders like borderline personality disorder, narcissism, like psychopathy and different things, do you think that they should get married, or they should get married to somebody who are very mature and can cooperate with them well, and that they can get through things well too, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think they can get married, but I think there needs to be a commitment to growth and trying to deal with it. And then obviously, yes, marrying a person that would be very understanding of that, know a lot about that, be willing to work with it. You know, realizing that they're getting into a commitment where it could be something where you face challenges that have, you know, more ups and downs, then yeah, I think it's okay. I really think it's just a person's commitment to growth and the other person's commitment to growth. Sometimes though, these things pop up and it's a complete surprise. And it doesn't feel like it's something you signed up for. And I think that that can be harder for people. And maybe where it's not dealt with well. You know, and people aren't willing to change, or like in cases of, what is it, like bipolar disorder. My dad has bipolar disorder. And there are those extreme times of mania where they're not really, you know, it seems otherworldly in the way they behave. And there's the desire to not be on medication because you enjoy the highs. So if you're not willing to be treated and be helped and be changed, then yeah, you shouldn't be married. But yeah, I think it's something that can be worked with. Any other thoughts on that? No? Okay. Is that good? Okay. All right, effects of divorce on children. All right, some studies indicate that the emotional impact of divorce for children is cumulative. So beginning with the parental separation and increasing over time and extending throughout adulthood, actually. All right, so it's a problem that, you know, it starts when you're young, but the problem's still happening. Right? You're still needing to deal with that relationship. You still, every holiday, have to go spend time with mom and dad as a separate unit. You still might have one parent saying, you know, your dad did this, or, you know, still holding hostility towards the other person. So the problem doesn't really go away. Most do fairly well with only minor difficulties. A lot of people, kids are resilient. They can learn to deal with it. I remember when my parents were actually, when they decided to get divorced, I remember feeling happy about it, which is kind of maybe an unusual response, because most kids probably don't feel that way, but I'm sure some do. But if you're in a home where there is a lot of instability due to the relationship being so volatile, then you long for a sense of peace. I remember me thinking that I just wanted my dad to not be there, because when my dad wasn't there, it wasn't as volatile. Not that my mom was much better, but having them argue maybe made it feel worse. But the other thing is that my mom, from a very early age, turned me against my dad. And it still affects the way I think towards him. Like, she said he was no good and kept saying it, and to the point where it really became something that I adopted. And kids that are divorced generally express loyalty towards one parent. They either like mom or they like dad better. I mean, sometimes this doesn't happen, but if you do that sort of thing where you're trying to tell your kid, I don't like the other person, then a loyalty issue could come up, and then that's a burden that they have to bear for the rest of their lives, dealing with feeling bad about it. The worst outcome for children is to remain in an intact family in which there is a chronic high level of conflict. All right, so that's the worst situation. I remember when my dad would come home and he'd be mad that my mom was drinking and be like ripping out, like my mother had alcohol hitting in every crevice of the house, like trying to hide it. I even remember one time when after my husband and I were married and we had our kids, we went to visit once, and she had started drinking again. And we went through her room looking for hidden bottles, and we found 40 empty vodka bottles,
Like
just in her room hidden.
Bottles or shots?
Bottles, I'm talking like the
Oh
liters.
my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, so she would do things like that, and I remember, as he's smoking pot, he even grew pot in our backyard. As he's doing all this, he's like pulling it all out. There's alcohol flying all over the house, and I think remembering that, if he would, having him there made it worse, just because his response to it was not healthy in the first place. Not that she was better, but the response was not good. So when he left the picture, it made me feel, I think, a bit more secure over time. But then my mother wasn't, it didn't take long for her to lose custody of us. One day I went home to our house about the time where she lost custody. I was probably 5th grade. And I went into our home, and have you ever seen the glass shower doors that are in showers? Well, no one was home, and I went in there, and the glass was all shattered, and there was just trails of blood throughout the entire house. Right? Don't know what happened. So 5th grade, and I started school when I was 4, so 5th grade was younger than a lot of 5th graders now. And shortly after that, there was probably at least 10 police cars surrounding my home, came into the house, and was questioning me, where's my mother? And all that I see is all this blood. They want me to get out photo albums to try to find what her identity is, because they're looking for her. And me being the child of the alcoholic that always wants to protect my mom, I did all I can to not even show a photo of her. I tried to thwart it. I don't know if they ended up finding it or not. So needless to say, it was very, very, very stressful, a very stressful home, and putting, kids of alcoholics have to be way older than they should be. Police should have never really tried to get me to tattle on where my mother was or figure out who she was. So then after that, it pretty much led to the fact that my parents both didn't have custody of me. And then thank God my grandmother, who was a Christian, stepped in and was there for us, so thank God for that. But anyway, that's one of the worst memories of my life, I would say, was probably that day. All right, if divorce is handled well, it can be far less damaging to children. So if parents don't talk negatively about one another, all right, that's a big thing. If custody isn't fought over, if you try to still parent the kids together, all of those things are helpful. All right, consequences of divorce on society. So it not only affects families, it affects society as a whole. So instability in a home creates an unstable society, creates an unstable church. It makes everything, the ripple effects of it go throughout schools, everywhere. So there's higher levels of crime, child abuse in general, neglect, drug and alcohol abuse by children of divorced families. My mother said she started drinking because her dad was an alcoholic and he had sexually abused her. So she said that she started drinking from the time she was 9 years old. She would go to the hidden stash, just like she hid the alcohol around the house. He would hide it around the house, and at 9 years old started drinking to push down the memories of being abused by him. Terrible. All right, educational achievement. So the negative impact on learning and achieving for kids, going through a divorce. As you know, a substitute teacher, I've realized that the most problematic kids come from the most difficult homes. That if they're behaving badly, there's probably a reason. right? Recently, I told you guys that I started looking through the sex offender list in Ellendale. I had this guy creeping on me when I was running one day in the fall. And so I looked up the sex offender list. And I started to realize that there were like 3 or 4 kids in the school whose dads were on the sex offender list. All right, so it just goes to show you that kids, you know, if they're experiencing extreme issues in school with behavior, with learning, it's likely stemming from family, from brokenness that's there. All right, so there could be a fear of abandonment. All right, and feeling like you're never going to really be cared for. An inability to concentrate on school. I remember I did my poorest in school when I was in the 6th grade when all of this was happening. And absenteeism, not being there at all. Family economy, so family finances go down, especially for divorced women. So they don't usually, if they're the stay-at-home moms, they have less means to provide for the kids in the first place. All right, the immediate effects on children. They suffer from loneliness, fear, worry, sadness, anger, guilt, and feelings of rejection. So sometimes there's also the feelings of causing the divorce in the first place, particularly in cases where kids, they don't understand why adults are fighting all the time. And they might feel guilty because they might fight as a result of some behavior the kid does. So a kid might do something that was not smart, and it can cause an eruption of emotions, and they can sort of feel like it's their fault somehow. They're more likely to experience depression, withdrawal, or aggressive and impulsive behaviors. I remember after we were kids, and my dad took custody of us, and then he lost custody for being physically abusive. It only lasted like a month. He didn't last very long with us, which we kind of didn't want him to. We didn't want him to take care of us in the first place. But they put us in mandatory counseling, right? So kind of like the state required it. And I remember, being forced to talk to somebody, and I remember my brother was 2 years younger. I was probably 11, he was 9. And he would do kind of, the therapy where you go and you draw and you do the play therapy thing where you try to get the kid to talk through playing. So interesting concept, but you had to do that too? Yeah, I guess it's a helpful way for kids to, like, what I always say is kids tell their Sunday school teachers everything, right? They tell their teachers a lot of things. I remember as a substitute teacher, I had a first grader literally just while I'm sitting there teaching her one-on-one tell me that her dad sexually abused her, and she started going through the details with me about it. And it's just weird how kids will tell adults that they trust things in times that seem so, strange, so odd, but they do it, and they will bring it up, and a lot of times through play, kids can process and talk about the world and talk about their feelings, so.
Maybe that's how it is for, because when I work out, it's just easier to talk and process things.
Yeah, if I'm really upset, I'll go for a run, and I have cried a time or two out on blue. There is something about physicality and processing of emotions. There definitely is. There's something there. It does help bring it up and bring it out. All right, any thoughts so far? All right. Long-term effects on children. Those with high support from a good relationship with parents and others do quite well. All right, so it can go both ways. People can do really well. Those of you from divorced families, do you feel like it was done well? Your parents did well with the divorce? No.
No.
No? Not at all, yeah. Mine was bad. All right, those who suffer initially might still have a long list of potential problems. All right, so there's still issues that I feel like I have to process at 51 years old from my upbringing, because it was so damaging. All right, I mean, most of it gets dealt with, as time goes on, but things still linger and problems still are there. It impacts kids' health, so negative physical illnesses, injuries, more common in children of divorce. Because we know that stress has a way, how you feel in your mind affects your body. We're body, soul, spirit, all interconnected. Negative emotionality and behaviors, higher suicide rates, impact on well-being of adults. So parents are in a lot of emotional turmoil, so they have less energy for children in the first place. So they have so many of their own problems in dealing with the relationship, dealing with the change in finances and the stress of that, and they're more likely to jump right into another relationship. So just swinging right back into another one immediately to try to solve it, to solve the pain of it. All right, deterioration of a relationship often occurs between one parent and child or children. So, preoccupation with divorce, so always thinking about it. Difficulty adjusting to parenting alone, trying to figure out how to deal with things, how you have consequences with one parent that are one thing, and then if the other parent doesn't agree with that, they try to change it to something else. Mothers can become emotionally dependent on children. All right, I know Zach said he had to do all the work, right? So that's physically, you had to do a lot of things, but they can become emotionally dependent too, talking maybe about their feelings more than they would if they had a spouse. You become the sounding board. Non-custodial parents miss out on time together. Obviously, that's a huge negative thing. I can't imagine not being able to raise my own kids and how incredibly painful that would be to even have them 50% of the time at best. Like, imagine how painful that is. Some fathers become Disneyland dads. All right, so they're the ones that engage in the recreation. My dad did this. Definitely feel like he tried to buy me off financially. Right, without a doubt. If I'd be out, just roaming the neighborhood or whatever, he would come by with cash to literally give me. He would bring me to, the mall to buy me things. Give vacation sort of, enticement things, all sorts of things to try to buy me off, which I felt like I was being bought off, actually. But some people don't, kids don't feel that way, but you have the one parent who becomes the parent that's the fun one, and then the other one that's the one that you have to follow the laws. And so it becomes a huge thing where you have a battle of maybe then some kids deciding to, instead of being with one parent, they want to go with the other one. And then when the other one doesn't make them happy, they want to go back to the other one. So it's a wrong setup from the beginning to try to be the one where you're making yourself to be the more popular or likable parent in the first place. All right, then on the other side, there's the deadbeat dads. The ones that don't give any child support, which child support, did you have that?
Yeah.
There was you said a lot of them didn't even give child support?
Yeah, I don't remember the percentage exactly.
I don't know if there was a percentage, but I was surprised to see that actually a lot don't even do it in the first place. It could be related to the cost of the divorce in the first place and needing to do it in a specialized way. My dad wasn't like this, thank God. But bad thing. All right, or disappearing dads, the ones that aren't there in the first place.
I'll just go to the grocery store, I'll be right back.
Yeah, and never come back ever?
Yeah.
It's hard to understand. All right, we'll stop there.
I'll be back.
Wait, where did you end at?
What's that?
Where did you end at? Yeah, but like.
Number 21. So starting on 22 and forward.
Chapter what?
Chapter 13, so you'd have to do 13 and 14.
Okay. Got it. I'm probably like literally gonna send it to you by tonight.
Okay. The other thing, guys, send me emails if you have any questions or topics we want to revisit next week.
How do, what do you expect for the last one? Is that gonna be based on the
Sorry.
Yeah.
Not a word.
All slides, just like a midterm, we'll just give you the second half of the material. You're doing good.
Professor.
Okay, time to go to work.
That's all right, you're doing okay. The other grades you have are good.
Yeah, we're working on that. Oh, wait, no, we're gonna make
Have a good day.
Bye.
Good deal, coach.
Hey, Professor.
See you, Thurber.
I got a question. Is the test going to be similar to the last one, as in it's like open notes? Or?
Yes. And then it's just parenting forward.
Okay.
7 to 14, I guess it was.
Sure. Perfect. And is it going to be on our own time as well again?
Yep. Only I'm gonna give you Thursday off to have some extra time.
So,
We're not gonna meet here on Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah, the test is gonna be your attendance.
Oh boy. Then is it like Thursday, Friday we have to do it, or just Thursday at that point?
I think it's due on Thursday because go trips were gonna
Oh,
have
yeah.
everybody done,
We
so
don't come, right?
I
it's
leave
due on
Saturday.
Thursday.
Okay. When does it open?
At least the day before. I could open it
Okay.
a bit sooner if we want, if we want.
Thursday's a little rough to do stuff because I work the night shift.
Yeah,
at
I
the
have it
library.
at least open on Wednesday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is also still rough because I'm normally at youth group for like 5 hours at
Right, I
night.
think that I think it was set for Wednesday, the Wednesday afternoon
Mhm.
to the next day at 5 o'clock.
Okay, yeah.
If it's a problem, let me know, I can open it sooner.
It should be fine. Just
What is it?